Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Arijit Ruha. Myself, on behalf of my colleagues in Polymedicure, we welcome you to this webinar on care of COVID-19 patients, a nursing perspective. And specifically, we bring today, and we are pleased and privileged to have speakers from Fortis Hospital in Mulund. We have three eminent speakers who are going to join the discussions today. Let me first introduce them, and then probably we'll start with the session. So before that, let me also say I'm leading the medical affairs division, the organization for Polymedicure, and I'm really happy to host this session today. So the first speaker is Miss Minimol Burgess. She is the Chief Nursing Officer at Fortis Hospital, Mulund. She's a BSc Nursing graduate from SNDT University with a total of 26 years experience in the nursing field, which includes 10 years of clinical and 16 years of experience in nursing administration. She has Six Sigma Green Belt, Hospital Administration and Quality Control Management certification to her credit. She is the Vice President for CCNS, Internal Auditor for JCI and NABH, with more than 10 articles published in national and international journals. She has won multiple awards for various QIPs conducted in the hospitals. We welcome you, ma'am, to this session.
Thank you, Arjit.
And Ma'am Burgess is going to talk about infusion safety challenges and safe practices. Our next speaker is Ms. Vincy Sunil Thomas, who is going to speak about the role of nurse in infection prevention in COVID units. She is a nurse educator at Fortis Hospital, Mulund. By education, she is MSc graduate from PD Hinduja College of Nursing with 10 years of clinical as well as teaching experience. She has won awards at various national and international forums for QIPs conducted in the hospital. We welcome you, Ms. Vincy. Our third speaker, Ms. Sneha Magar. She's going to talk about nursing management of COVID-19 patients. She's currently working in Fortis Hospital as as a nurse educator. She has completed her MSc Nursing from PD Hinduja College of Nursing and has worked as a work experience of over 10 years. She has won prizes and appreciations at national and international platforms for the various QIP projects conducted in Fortis Hospital. So we welcome you, Ms. Neha, to this session.
Thank you.
So before we start, I mean, we all know the background. COVID has been, relentless in its, impact and attacks on us. It has left no part of the healthcare system untouched. So we are seeing cracks getting exposed here and there. We are learning a lot from this experience, so that in future, if such an epidemic happens, then we are better prepared, I would say. But specifically coming back to the topic of discussion today, we look forward to learn from each one of you, and our audience is going to learn from each one of you what can be done specifically in the care of COVID-19 patients. So first of all, we'll request Ma'am Burgess to start your talk.
So thank you, Arjit. Let me come to the point why we have taken this topic. We all talk about COVID-19 and people are focusing COVID, but there is a story to it. So end of my topic, I will tell why I have taken when you approached us. Why I thought, because we are always busy and a lot of webinar sessions, daily practical difficulties. But I thought this is a point which I want to tell nursing fraternity. When we look, say always COVID, some things we are forgetting when it comes to infusion safety and safe practices. So I wanted to tell my colleagues, please don't forget about our back to basics, what we were doing in our regular ICUs. It is very important, even if it is COVID, non-COVID, surgical ICU or whatever ICU, certain practices we were doing earlier, please continue to do it. Otherwise, mortality always happen not because of COVID. There are many patients who are dying because of hospital acquired infections. So let's keep our guard and continue to do good things, because people who can make difference in the wherever area they are working, ICU or what, they are nurses, because they are the one who are with the patient all the time. So if patient has to go home safe and healthy, it is in the hand of nurses. Okay, so I'll come back to the topic, the challenges what we are facing, and some safe practices which we can do in our ICU or ward. So challenges, when you ask any nurse leader, what are the challenges faced in a COVID unit, it is manpower. So I'll tell you what is our background. We run a 70 bedded COVID area, which we have around 30 bedded ICU. So 20 active ICU, 10 step down, and remaining are the wards. So our COVID area started on March 23rd. So we are one of the first hospital to start the COVID unit. March 23rd we started, and we are continuously running more than 100% occupancy in our COVID units. Now in our ICU, so I will be telling more about ICU, because related to infusion safety, the issues we are facing, and I can bring examples related to the ICU. So we have a 20 bedded critical care unit, and at any point of time, like last week and all, we had 10 to 11 patients who are on ventilator, around 7 to 8 patients who are on HFNC. Then there are patients are on NIV. So I can say all patients are central line and arterial line. And the biggest challenge is manpower. Now to run a 20 bedded active ICU with the full occupancy all the time, with 10 ventilator patients, if you really see nurse patient ratio in a regular ICU, we say 1:1. So if I have to run 20 bedded ICU with the 10 ventilator with HFNCs and NIVs, I require 15 nurses per shift, and we run 6-hour shift. That means you can count 60 nurses I require a day to run that ICU. Plus there are people we give more of in the COVID because they are in PPEs. So number of manpower is very, very important. It is very difficult to maintain. So what we do as nursing leaders, we pull up nurses from OTs, cath lab, ER. Such nurses are also posted in the ICU to manage the critically ill patient. So manpower is the biggest challenge what we are facing. Even if I have manpower, the skilled nurses are not there to look after the patients on critically ill and ventilator, because the OT nurses are not aware about infusion safety and cleaning the hub and all those things. So skilled nurses is very difficult, because then I put a mix of nurses in the ICU to look after the patients. So these are the two main challenges what we are facing. And the other thing is, in the COVID ICU, most of the time around 4 to 5 patients are in prone position. So again, at a time to put the patient into prone position, you require 6 to 7 people at the bedside of the patient to put this patient into prone. After 6 hours, back to supine. So patients with all these lines, patient will be intubated with ET tube, central line, arterial line, with the lines to put the patient into prone. It's another task or risk, securing the lines, taking care. So you require experienced people. So when it comes, it's all into manpower. That is the biggest challenge. So today we are talking only about infusion safety. We have to talk all about the ICU and care. It is really difficult. So we will be focusing infusion safety. What are the challenges and what best we can do? Is it okay, Arjit? More into infusion safety.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is what our ICU. So another problem we faced is, in our ward we had around 12 to 13 patients who were with oxygen. Now in this patients doing ABG, very frequently they do ABG, one in the morning, one in the evening, because anytime patient can deteriorate. So 12 to 13 ABGs at a time. Again, ward nurses, arterial patients are with, you have to prick the arterial line. So all are not skilled nurses in the ward. Then we had to give some help from anesthetist going inside and pricking the patient in the ward. So we had to create a step down ICU where better monitoring can happen. not in the as active ICU, step down ICU we created to ease the pressure on the wards. So challenges is lot of lines, monitoring, skilled nurses, manpower. So these were the main challenges to maintain a safe practice for the patient. Now, when it comes to how do we make sure infusion safety, or what are some safe practices we can do in the ICU when it comes to line care and everything. So a patient comes in, of course, when a patient comes in, if I have 20 patients, all 20 patients has arterial line in the ICU, because ABGs are very frequently, because patient deteriorate very fast. They are put in oxygen to HFNC to ventilator very fast. So arterial line is there for all the patients. So how do we lease the nurses work? Because you have limited manpower in hand. All your nurses who are within the ICU, all are not the ICU experienced skilled nurses with many years of experience. How do you do is, when any patient comes, we have created a critical area bed. One bed is designated, which is kept ready to receive any critical patient. If a patient becoming critical or new admission comes, so we put a air mattress in place. We have created kits for the center line, arterial line. All the kits are ready, prepared and kept. So any patient comes in, there is no need or for a nurse to run around to collect the set or kits. With that ready-made trolley, they go to the bedside. Okay. Now, when a patient comes, first you have to see provision of the equipments. Do you have enough syringe pumps within your ICU? And if there is a kit available, for even if a nurse who is not very senior, she can just take and go to the bedside and assist the doctor in putting the lines. So when you are putting the lines, we have given a USG machine which is kept inside. So always USG guided line insertion is done in ICU 100%. Okay, and when you are putting the line, again maintaining aseptic technique. So the infusion safety starts from the selection of the line or putting a center line in the beginning only, and then the doctor decide and they do the line insertion. After putting the line insertion, the securing the line with a proper tape which is available, and you can see the site. So securing the site is very important. And after you have secured the lines, then we cover the center line with a sterile disposable cover, so that we can prevent no lines or no hubs hanging out from that sterile field. Again, after, you have to make sure, because as I said, ventilator patient usually go into prone position. So securing it and taping it to the properly to the shoulder with the sterile towel is very important, so that lines are secured well to patient's body. Then comes, once you secure, what are the, because some things we faced is, when we had 10 patients within the ICU on ventilator, and of course manpower I could give is 10, we could see some patients are developing some line infection. So we had to go and talk to the nurses who are working in that ICU. So we have an area, all these nurses are put up within the hospital, those who are on duty. So we asked the nurses, please tell how many of you all do hand hygiene 100%. So we all, because see what happened in COVID ICU is they all are in PPE. They wear a double glove. So this double glove hand is their hand, because they have to wear sterile gloves over this double glove when they are going to the patient or touching the line. So when we asked them, it was not 100% people were doing. So they say it openly. So we had to reinforce on hand hygiene to the nurses. So we told them, yes, you are double gloved, but when you are handling the lines, please wear sterile gloves over that and come out. When you are coming out, remove that third gloves which you touched the patient, because we had one patient developing infection and it went on to the other patient, because 6 people going into the patient's cubicle, they do things while proning, but their body is not, so with the same PP they go to the other patient. So if patient is one patient is positive, there are chances there are other patient also becoming positive. So hand hygiene is very very, very important. That has to be mantra while they are working in a critical care area or in the ward while handling this patient. Now you have put the line, you secured the line. Then when you come to daily use of the line, now when any nurse come during their start, she has to observe the line every day morning. Is what is the site? So that is why we put a dressing which you can see the site of the cannula. Then is there any blood clots, all your whatever connector? So we don't use the three-way, we use the needleless connectors are used, so that again line infection is prevented. Flushing the lines, if the lines are not in use, flush once in a shift. Before administering any medicine, cleaning the hub with alcohol, the alcohol wipes. You flush the line, you administer the injection, again flush the line, clean the hub and leave it. So cleaning the hub, flushing the line, hand hygiene. These are three important things while they are handling with the line infection. And in case if the patient develop any infection or anything, informing and monitoring the patient. So to prevent cross contamination from one patient to other, what we have done, so they wear PPE. Over the PPE, we started giving them disposable gowns, because we realized one patient developed infection and it was starting off a spurt to other patient. So we told over the PPE, wear disposable gowns if they are going in touch with the patient's bed or body, and remove the disposable gown and throw it and come out and changing the gloves, which is a third glove which they are wearing. So with this, we could control the infection. And as I'm saying, we are treating COVID, but these patients are very, very high risk for infection due to certain medication what they are getting. Mostly ICU patients all get immunosuppressant, so they are so much prone to get infection. So the hospital acquired infection or CLABSI and all, so we have to be really careful. We may treat COVID, but the patient may die of hospital acquired infection. Sepsis, this is very common. So we cannot forget the back to basic, what we were doing earlier in our regular ICU. So we talk about COVID, but please do not forget about infusion safety, keeping patients safe from hospital acquired infection. So these are some challenges, and when Binsi and Sneha will come to nursing care, she will tell more about each problem what we are facing. But these are some tips. Keeping the ready-made trolleys available for line insertion, so no running away, which will reduce the nurse's work. Keeping the bed ready, always keep an emergency bed ready with your air mattress or whatever, so that you can just take the patient and do the activities. And wearing sterile gloves while handling the thing, cleaning the hub, hand hygiene. If a patient is positive with some infection, please make sure that infection is not spread from one patient to other. Need to have some barrier over the PPE so that your patient is protected, and so that all our patients go well from whichever area the patient is admitted. So this is more, if anything comes, I'll add on to my point. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. That was really a very comprehensive view on what it is to be done. What are the best practices regarding the challenges that you face in the ICU, especially with critically ill COVID patients. I would request the audience also to type in their questions either in the chat box or the Q&A section, so that once we have those, we can post it to the speakers. Thank you. So our next speaker, Ms. Binsi, is going to talk on the role of nurse in infection prevention in COVID units. So over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Arjit. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sister Binsi. I'm the nurse educator working here. So I'll be taking you through the role of nurse in infection prevention in COVID units. So nurses being frontline professionals working across acute care settings, long-term care settings, nursing homes, schools, communities, and government healthcare agencies, we play a major role in prevention of COVID pandemic. So Infection prevention in COVID units, it caters to both infection prevention among healthcare workers as well as among the COVID patients. So I have divided my topics into four main headings. So I'll begin with each. Okay, so first, the most important thing among nurse is awareness. Awareness is the key. We need to upskill ourselves, okay, in order to tackle this pandemic. Okay, we need to be aware of what is happening around. We should not limit our knowledge to what we see around us within the hospital, but also we need to be up to date about the disease trends, the disease progress, what is happening around, the research updates, treatment updates, etc. We also need to be aware of the guidelines that has been set up by our respective hospitals to tackle this pandemic. Okay. Next is infection prevention basics. As Mini Ma'am has already mentioned about back to basics, so we should remember our basics. We should be 100% complying to the basics of infection prevention, like hand hygiene, like the correct technique of donning and doffing of PPE, then terminal cleaning, surface disinfection, etc. In hand hygiene, we should remember that we should be mindful about the moments of hand hygiene. It is not different, like in the non-COVID units, something different we do, and the COVID units, something different we do. No, it is not different. The only difference comes is when you have to do your hand hygiene over your gloves. That is the only difference. But the moments remain the same, the steps remain the same. The content of the chlorhexidine gluconate, that also remains the same. Okay, all of that remains the same, but we need to be mindful of when to use these hand hygiene techniques. Next is following PPE etiquettes. Okay, PPE is very important to prevent infection to self. Okay, so following correct PPE etiquettes is important. We believe that PPE ensemble has certain limitations. For example, the N95 mask might be very uncomfortable for the staff. The goggles might fog. Staff wearing spectacles might have it very difficult to wear goggles over your own spectacles. All of these things are limitations to the PPE, but then we should remember that each of these ensemble is important and it has to be worn as a must. Then donning of PPE. So we should remember that every hospital needs to have a donning area separate, okay, preferably. Donning area, if you do not have a separate area also, it's okay. But then while donning, you should ensure that all the articles of the PPE is ready. A chair should be available so that the person can wear the PPE comfortably and sit and wear the jumpsuit properly on the chair. And if there's a mirror available in the donning room, that will help in checking whether your PPE has been appropriately applied and no skin surfaces exposed to the environment. Then during the working hours, again, we should be very careful that we do not touch any of the contaminated surface of the body. We should not touch our goggles or mask during our working hours. And we should ensure that if there's a tear or loss of integrity that happens in the PPE, we should not do any patchwork, but then you have to exit from the area, doff the entire PPT and do the donning and come back again and join for work. Another thing is, whenever you are approaching the patient, whenever you are going to do some procedure for the patient, it is better to wear an additional pair of gloves and a plastic apron if it is available. If it is feasible for your organization, that can be done. And when you're coming off that unit, it has to be discarded. But hand hygiene, there's no compromise to hand hygiene. You have to do it on top of the gloves. Then we should avoid reuse of PPE. Okay, PPE is only single use. It should not be reused. If a staff needs to take a break, if a nurse wants to take a break from the duty hours, you should, like, she has to doff completely instead of just pulling down the mask and having tea. No, that should never be done. The entire doffing has to be done. The staff can take a break and then again don and join the duty. Then doffing. We should remember that doffing is a high-risk procedure and a doffing area is a must. Okay, doffing area has to be separate towards the exit of the department. So in the doffing area, again, a chair should be available. And if you have a doffing buddy who can guide you, assist you with doffing, that will be better. But since we have severe staff shortage, we might not have a doffing buddy around. So what we do in our hospital is that all staff in every department is trained on donning and doffing. Okay, we do not separate staff as non-COVID unit and COVID unit. So everybody is aware of how to don and doff. And in the doffing area, we also have this display made of the doffing technique so that if there's any confusion, they can just go through the display and do the doffing. We should remember that since doffing is a high-risk procedure, you have to do it extremely carefully and you can take your own time. So while you doff, you have to remove the gown inside out, ensure that you do not touch any contaminated surface of your PPE. Okay. And while doffing, also remember that as you doff each of your PPE, appropriate hand hygiene has to be done after each of the PPE. Like you remove your goggles, you have to do hand hygiene. You remove your N95, you have to do your hand hygiene. So hand hygiene is a must each and every time. Then you can move on to your shower area to take your shower. What you wear inside your PPE depends on your hospital. For example, we use scrub suits within the PPE. So whatever is feasible for your hospital, that can be done. So this was about awareness. Staff nurses, we as nurses need to be aware of basics of infection prevention practices. Now, moving on to adhering to guidelines set by the hospital. So I have moved it as a separate point because every hospital has different guidelines set. So we have to follow what guidelines have been set in our hospital, because it is depending on our resources and our infrastructure. Okay. So like for example, in our emergency department, we have 10 beds to cater to all the patients. But now since patients, COVID positive patients walk in, suspected patients walk in, we cannot keep them in the regular cubicles. So we have set apart 2 beds, 2 separate cubicles for holding COVID as well as suspect cases. So these cubicles have negative pressures, and we ensure that the doctors or nurses assigned to this cubicle, they have to wear full PPE. Now, again, it depends on hospital to hospital. You can let all the ER staff wear the full PPE, or you can do this, that those who are assigned to these cubicles, assigned to take care of the suspect or positive patients, they wear the full PPE. That can also be done. The person assigned to the triage area, the nurse sitting in the triage area who does the assessment for all the patients, should also wear full PPE. This nurse can also be the one who goes to receive patients from the ambulance and gets the patient to the ER, because we never know, any patient can turn out to be a positive patient. So she should be in full PPE. Then nurses in COVID ICUs. Now, nurses in COVID ICUs have to be extremely careful about infection prevention in the ICUs, because as ma'am has already told, these patients will be requiring long-term care, long-term ventilation probably. They might be in sedation for a long time of proning, and they are on immunosuppressants, immunomodulators, steroids, etc., which reduces their immunity. So there's a high chance of infection among these patients. So we have to be extremely careful when it comes to infection prevention. So we have to follow all the basic infection prevention guidelines that we practice in the ICUs, in any other ICU. For example, you follow line care, drain care, wound care, etc. Also the VAP bundle, like if the patient is on a ventilator, so ventilator associated pneumonia prevention bundle has to be practiced. For example, suctioning as required. Now, suctioning, we ensure that all the patients undergo closed suctioning, so that if it's an open suction, there are chances of aerosol generation. So we ensure that all patients receive only closed suction. Then again, all the other parameters of the VAP bundle, like elevation of the bed and GI prophylaxis, etc., that we do in the non-COVID ICUs, we follow it in these ICUs also. And again, CLABSI bundle, ma'am has already elaborated on what are the things to do, and CORTI bundle. So whichever patient is on a Foley's catheter, we have to follow the CORTI bundle. And especially remember that during the insertion of these lines, aseptic techniques have to be followed like in any other ICU, but we have to be extremely careful that especially during aerosol generating procedure, that we wear extra PPE and are on our guard. Then intubation, when it is performed, we preferably perform in the negative pressure rooms. Like in your ICUs, you will have negative pressure rooms also. So there we perform the intubation for the patients. Another thing is COVID patients. Any patient who is in the ICU with COVID, they might develop any other hospital acquired infection. For example, if a patient has a multi-drug resistant bug in the tracheal secretions or wound secretions, they might be advised for additional contact isolation. COVID patients are already in contact isolation as well as respiratory isolation. But here there might be additional isolation advised because it's an MDR bug that can be transmitted to other patients. So in such case, the staff has to wear a gown over the PPE and wear gloves over the PPE. I mean, these are additional requirements for the staff, and she'll be taking care of the patient, and 1:1 nursing ratio has to be maintained in such a case. Okay, so in your ICU, you have 5 staff and one of the patients has an MDR bug. You'll have to assign that one staff to that one patient. You cannot mix the staff with the other patients, or there are chances that the other patients also develop this MDR because the others are also may have problem of immunosuppression. Okay, so this was about ICU. So basically all infection prevention measures in ICUs, all your bundles have to be followed in the ICUs. Now we move on to intra-hospital transfers. Now, usually in the COVID ICU and ward, we do not encourage any transfer out. I mean, transferring of a COVID patient to the non-COVID unit. So we do not allow for intra-hospital transfers. So if a patient in the COVID unit requires an X-ray, a portable X-ray is arranged for these patients. So that X-ray machine will be there in the unit itself. If an ABG has to be done, an ABG machine has to be stationed in the unit itself. Okay, but there are instances where you have no option, but you have to transfer this patient within the hospital. For example, we have our new building completely kept for COVID patients, and the old building completely for a non-COVID patients. But our CT department is in our non-COVID area. So transferring a patient from a COVID ICU to the CT department, it becomes a little tedious aspect because it's an intra-hospital transfer of a COVID positive patient, and there's a risk of transmitting COVID to the other patient people around. So what as nurses, what we need to do is we need to ensure that this transfer is informed to the nursing supervisor, security supervisor, etc. So nurses need to ensure that before the transfer occurs, people are informed so that the area, the transport area, the area of movement is cordoned off. Like there's nobody lingering around in that corridor. So it should be ensured that there's nobody in the passage. So the nurse, before the transfer happens, should ensure that the area is cordoned off. Then after the movement happens, she should ensure that the area, the complete passage is terminally cleaned. And even the lift in which the patient was transported, the terminal cleaning should happen. So for this, a lot of management support is required because these area, the movement of patient from one department to the other, it has to be charted beforehand. The plan should be there beforehand. Then only the nurse feels empowered that, okay, this is the area I'll have to walk through and this is what is done, has to be done. So the nurse, in coordination with the nursing supervisor, ensures that after patient movement, all of these areas that are exposed to the patient are terminally cleaned. Also, when this patient undergoes a procedure, for example, CT scan, and then moves out of the department itself has to undergo a terminal cleaning, okay, without which no other patient will be taken into the, for the CT. So it's just an example. Okay, so that was about intra-hospital transfers. Also remember that whenever a transport happens, whatever transport modes that you use, a stretcher or a wheelchair, that has to be also cleaned. If an ambulance is used, for example, for us, sometimes it becomes a challenge that from our new building to the old building, instead of taking the patient from within the hospital, we take an ambulance from outside the hospital. So difficult to explain, but we use ambulance as a mode of transport at times. So if an ambulance is used, again, we should ensure that after the patient movement is done, the ambulance is thoroughly cleaned. Now, moving on to other areas. So I was talking about role of infection prevention in COVID units, but also speaking about other areas where we have to be prepared to take COVID patients. For example, the operation theaters, cath lab. Okay, these areas also have to be prepared for taking in COVID patients, because an emergency occurs, we cannot deny an emergency treatment for the patient. So in the operation theater, the principle of sterility during donning and doffing, etc., remains the same, but there's a little change. That is, though this PPE, the PPE kit that we get, it's written sterile packet, but we cannot consider it as sterile, because after we don it, like we wear the headgear, the foot gear, etc., after we don it, it becomes unsterile. So it cannot be considered sterile. So in OT, what we do is we wear the entire PPE without wearing the gloves, and we do the surgical scrubbing, and then the gowning and gloving is performed after that. And in case of an ortho surgery where a lead apron has to be worn, so after donning of the complete PPE, the lead apron would be worn, and then we go on to the scrubbing and then gowning, and then the usual assisting for the case will happen. So in OT, we have seven major OTs. So out of that, one of the OT has been blocked as a COVID OT, and the other OT as a standby OT. So total we can consider 2 OTs as COVID OT. So whenever a COVID positive patient requires an emergency surgery, or whenever there's a suspect patient who requires an emergency surgery, we take into these OTs only. So we have emergencies like cesarean section coming in and craniotomies for SAH or IC bleed, etc. coming in. So these are the major emergencies coming in. So we take these patients in these OTs only, and adequate PP and all is worn by all of the staff there. And again, the similar principle goes on to the cath lab also. We should remember that doping area should be different even in the OT and cath lab. We cannot have it in a common area. So it should be a different room for doping, and each person has to dope separately. Doping cannot happen in a group. Doctors, nurses all going in a group and doping, that should not happen. Individually, each person has to go and dope. And then shower area can be located according to the infrastructure available. Again, in the OT and cath lab, when you're planning to take a case, remember that you keep only minimal equipments and supplies or consumables within the OT. Okay, whatever is not required, just move it away from the OT. Do not place it within. Okay, if you require an additional thing, you can place a person as a runner who can get you emergency things, but do not keep much articles within the OT. Also, in our OT, we completely cover all our equipments with plastic water resistant sheets, so that cleaning post procedure becomes easier. So plastic resistant sheets, water resistant plastic sheets do help. So after the case is complete, all cleaning is done, all these plastic wrappers are discarded. Okay. When a cesarean section case comes in, like we take the patient in OT6, so the baby is resuscitated in the other OT. We do not resuscitate the baby in the same OT. Okay. Next, we move on to holding areas. So we spoke about COVID ICU, COVID units. We spoke about ER, OT, cath lab. Now moving on to the other areas where we hold suspect patients. Okay. Patients coming into the hospital who do not have a COVID negative report, we have to admit them, but we cannot place them in COVID units. But we place them in the regular wards. We separate them as suspects and the negative patients. We cannot mix them together. So again, if you have a ward of 30 patients and 5 of these patients do not have a COVID report with them, and there is suspicion of COVID as seen in the X-ray or in the HRCT, there are patches, there's a suspicion. So these patients should not be mixed with other patients. They should be segregated in one part of the ward, and the staff assigned to this patient should be single, like one staff should be assigned to the patient, and this staff should not be mixed with the other staff nurses. So the staff nurse can stay in this area itself, and somebody can just help her out with documentation, etc. Okay, and the equipments and supplies used for these patients should not mix with the others. For example, a BP machine is used, or a SpO2 probe is used for these set of patients who are suspects. It should not be mixed with the other patients. Okay, in case an equipment is single, like you have only one ECG machine in the entire ward. So if it is used for the suspect cases, so before using it for the other patients, it has to be completely thoroughly cleaned, and then only used it for the other patients. So this was about some guidelines set up in your own hospitals that you need to follow. So it will depend on hospital to hospital, but the basic principles remain the same. Moving on to cleaning and disinfection. So we as nurses, what is our role is that we need to be vigilant that cleaning takes place 100% with 100% accuracy. We need to observe that our housekeeping staff, whether they are doing it appropriately. Every shift, the cubicles are to be cleaned. Or whenever there is a contamination with blood or body fluids. Also, when a patient vacates from a cubicle, that cubicle or that patient room has to be thoroughly cleaned. So as nurses, we need to supervise whether the cleaning is taking place appropriately. 1% sodium hypochlorite solution or quaternary ammonium compound can be used for thoroughly cleaning these areas. Another thing is, remember that in your COVID ICU, you might not have all the critical equipments. For example, we had a scenario where one of the patient had deteriorated and he required a CRRT machine for support. So the CRRT machine, we had taken it from the surgical ICU and used it for this patient. But now this machine has to be returned back to the non-COVID ICU. So before returning, what the nurse's role is to ensure that thorough cleaning of the machine takes place. So what we had done is that in the COVID ICU, one cleaning happened. outside the COVID ICU, one cleaning happened. And before it was returned to our surgical ICU, again, one thorough cleaning happened, and it was supervised with direct observation. Okay. So supervision needs to be done by the nurses. Other thing is that, okay, any department you plan to open after a long period of time, for example, you have too many cases and then you have to open a particular department, you ensure that terminal cleaning is done, then only you open it. Okay, then within the COVID ICU, there might be waste generated. Yes, waste will be generated. So you usually all hospitals separate general waste, then your plastic waste separate, and your gauze and things separate. So in the ICU, COVID ICU also, the waste can be segregated separately, but when it comes out of the ICU, it's all segregated in one liner labeled as COVID unit, because every waste generated in the COVID unit is considered as infected. There is nothing as infected and general, no, everything is infected. So it's labeled as infected. The outer layer of the bag, the liner, is cleaned with hypochlorite, and then it is sent for incineration as per the BMC guidelines. So a separate BMC van comes in to collect these waste. It is not mixed with the regular hospital waste, and it is sent for incineration in a separate area. It is not mixed with the non-COVID wastes. Okay, all the linen that is used in the ICU, the bed sheets, blankets, etc. So the linen used in the ICUs, again, there's no segregation as infected and non-infected. Every linen used is considered as infected. So it is all tied up in a liner labeled as COVID waste, and then the outer area is cleaned with hypochlorite, and it is sent to the laundry. Now, even in the laundry, such waste is treated at the last. Okay. After all the laundry is done, this waste is treated last, like dipping in sodium hypochlorite, disinfection happens, and then only it is cleaned, and laundry personnel is given appropriate PPE before they handle the waste, do the laundry. Okay, and then you also have items like procedure tray, injection tray, etc. that needs to be sent for sterilization. So this has to be sent to the CSST. So such items will also be placed in separate baskets which are completely closed, cleaned outside with hypochlorite, labeled as COVID items, and then sent to the CSST so that CSST personnel can do the sterilization separately. So, okay. So this was about cleaning and disinfection. Remember that everything that is used for COVID patient has to be cleaned and disinfected, and then only sent for further cleaning. The last part I want to focus is the culture of the organization. So if we as nurses need to fulfill our role in prevention or infection prevention, our organization needs to support us. Okay, we need to have adequate supplies of N95 masks and PPEs. Okay, there should be no instance where something is unavailable, because even the three-ply mask, we give it to patients every day so that infection can be prevented among patients. So, and three-ply mask is provided to all patients. So there should not be deficit of any item for the staff. Then the organization should ensure that communication facility is available. We know that face-to-face communication cannot happen in COVID wards. So sometimes doctors have to take rounds, like the consultant will not be present within the unit, he'll be somewhere else. So telecommunication modality has to be ensured. Tabs can be placed in COVID units, in ICUs, wards, etc., so that communication happens. Even the patient relatives have to be communicated about the patient status. So that also can happen in a tab, and they don't need to come to the unit or to the hospital. In fact, we do not allow relatives at all in the COVID unit. So telecommunication modalities need to be available in the ICUs. Then we know that the medical records, the case files, case papers of the patient cannot be taken from the ICU and transferred with the patient to the non-COVID unit. Okay? Suppose a patient in the COVID unit turns out to be negative. He's treated, turns out to be negative, and has to be shifted to the non-COVID unit. Now we cannot hand over the file of the patient along with the patient to the non-COVID unit, because the file can be infected. So in such a case, what can be done? So again, the organization needs to support us by providing a scanning machine within the hospital, so within the COVID unit, so that immediately the medical records can be scanned and the soft copies can be transferred to the respective departments. Next, the hospital infrastructure again needs to be modified depending on the need. For example, no hospital will be prepared for a COVID pandemic, right? So whatever infrastructure is available, within that we have to create resources. So creation of donning area, dosing area, a lot of thinking and planning is done before an area is identified. Also shower area. So for us, like we didn't have a shower area, so we converted our utility rooms as shower areas at the exit of the ICUs and wards. Next, for the nurses, like an additional support for the nurses can be like all the nurses working in the COVID units. What we do is nurses working in the COVID units, they are accommodated together in one area, and we take care of their diet and all the other needs, and we provide high protein diet to the nurses so that they are strong in immunity, and other needs are also taken care of since they are accommodated in the hospital itself. And last but not the least, we should remember that with the organization support, nurses are empowered. And empowered nurses are the ones who can really make a difference, who can really work with zeal to help patients recover better. Now, nurses should be empowered to correct deficiencies in the systems. And nurses should also be bold enough to report if they develop any symptoms, like they are having some sore throat or some difficulty. Okay, they should be able to report it and not hide it, so that they prevent spreading of infection among the colleagues, and they should be ready to go into isolation as prescribed, and like follow isolation, like maybe 7 days of isolation as prescribed by the doctor. And last but not the least, remember that there are no shortcuts to safety. Okay, with this I would like to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Vincy. It was very, very comprehensive, touching almost every aspect of uh, the care continuum. Perhaps maybe we'll come back to you on maybe a couple of questions which I have in my mind, but keeping time as one of the things, we'll move to the next speaker. Sister Sneha, please, share your thoughts.
Okay, so good afternoon all. I am Sister Sneha and I'm going to talk about the nursing perspective of how to take care of COVID-19 patients. So nurses play a very important role in all healthcare organizations when it comes to COVID-19, especially because we are the ones who are at the patient's bedside 24/7, and we are at a maximum risk of getting infected also. So taking care of ourselves and taking care of patients, for this we need to get our skills and knowledge updated, upgraded. We have to go through all the research articles which is being published, all the evidence based practices which is on. So we have to keep ourselves upgraded all times. So today I'm going to talk about the general care of COVID-19 patients, how it is being done, and what is our role in taking care of such patients. So to begin with, I'll start with first the assessment. I assume, or we know that all organizations have their own assessment formats for all patients. Okay, so in our hospital we have admission assessments for your normal patients, adult patient, pediatric, geriatric. So now COVID-19 is come, the pandemic has come. So for this we have created a new assessment for such patients, and this assessment is just a small criteria. It is like a checklist which the nurses have to look at the patient, see for the symptoms, the reports, the values, and they tick accordingly, and this assessment is done daily. So why this is important? Because these are the things what you have to observe in these patients daily, and accordingly the treatment and the line of management will depend on. Also, when you come about planning a nursing care plan, you should have a care plan specially for these patients, because how it happens is we in our hospital have predefined nursing care plans with all the nursing diagnosis system wise. So now we have formulated one more predefined care plan for COVID-19 patients. So these have like nursing diagnosis like impaired gas exchange, then you have ineffective airway clearance, nutritional imbalance. So all the probable nursing diagnoses are put into that nursing dev, where the nurses just have to tick the nursing diagnosis, the plan of care, whether they've implemented, and the expected outcomes. Also, we have, as Mini Ma'am has said, we have COVID wards and COVID isolation wards units and the ICU units. So when a patient comes to you with mild symptoms, these patients are usually kept in the wards. So any patient with mild symptoms, they are symptomatically managed. Okay, so it is like if the patient has cough, a cough syrup is given, or if he has a headache, a painkiller is given, or a analgesic is given. Along with these symptomatic management, you have vitamin C supplements and you have multivitamin supplements which is given to the patient with mild symptoms. They are monitored also for lab values for CBC, CRP, chest X-ray, ECG. So these are done on a regular period of time or actually daily to see whether the patient is prognosing or deteriorating. Now in our hospital, we also do a walk test. A walk test is a test which tells you whether the patient has subtle hypoxia. So this test is done for patients who are mobilized and not on O2. So what we do in this test is that we tell the patient to walk for 6 minutes. So first we take the SpO2 and tell the patient to walk for 6 minutes in the corridor. And after he finishes a 6-minute walk, and again an SpO2 is checked whether it is dropped or is it maintained at the baseline level. So if the patient's SpO2 drops by 2 to 3%, this means that the patient has subtle hypoxia and he might be started on O2 supplementation. Okay, so and for the rest of the patients who are on O2 supplementation, they are started as per their ABG values, that is their PaO2 values or their SpO2 values. So accordingly, whether either they are started on O2 depending on how many liters, like 2 liters or 3 liters, while via nasal prongs or face mask according to their SpO2 level. So this is the usual care what is done for the patients who are there in the wards. In the critical units, as Mini ma'am has already spoken, that every critical isolation unit should have at least 1 or 2 beds ready to receive any critically ill patient. This is just to avoid and fuss at the last moment, so that when a patient comes that everything is ready there. So your patient cubicle should be ready with all the ventilator, crash cart, and all the kits, as Minimum has already said, like we have trolleys for line insertion, like central line insertion trolley, we have artery line insertion trolley, we have intubation trolleys, all the ventilators, HFNCs are kept ready, so accordingly whatever can be used as per the patient required. So this is what you have to keep it ready beforehand before the patient comes. The other thing also is what we do is we have special nurses like airway nurse, drug nurse, line insertion nurse. So these responsibilities are given to a nurse every shift, so that when a new patient comes into the ICU or the isolation unit, these nurses are well prepared and they know how the procedure is done. So a proactiveness is there from their side and things are already ready. So the procedure flow or the functioning becomes more easy and fluent, and the procedure is successful without any fuss. Also, the nurses should be efficient enough to assess. As I've said, the assessment is very, very important in a critical unit because a patient in the ICU is very critical. So any minor deterioration, the nurse should be able to capture it. So that is why in an ICU, you need to have a system-wise approach, what to assess in the patient. So first, we'll go on to the respiratory system. So in a respiratory system, first, the patient is put onto a cardiac monitor. So cardiac monitor, you have a continuous monitoring of the respiratory rate and depth and the SpO2. So you have an SpO2 plate will tell you how good is the saturation of the patient and the levels. Also, periodic ABG gas values are done, that is arterial blood gases values are done. This is done every 2 hourly or 4 hourly according again to the patient's need. So with this, the values are checked, especially the PaO2 value. And depending on the PaO2 value, the doctors decide whether to go on for an HFNC or an NRBM or an ventilator or just an O2 mask, face mask, O2 via face mask. So now we know about face mask and nasal cannula, but in this COVID-19 pandemic, the HFNCs is taking all the limelight. So what is this HFNC? So HFNC is high flow nasal cannula. Now this is a newer modality technique. It is the functioning of this machine is just like a BiPAP, but the advantage here is the patient doesn't have to wear a mask. So it is like a nasal cannula which delivers high flow oxygen. So it is just as a setting how it is kept. So with this HFNC, the patient is able to talk, the patient is able to eat. So you don't have to disconnect a patient from an HFNC as it is done in a BiPAP. So when a patient is put on HFNC, the initial settings what they put is 60% of FiO2 and 60%, 60 liters per minute airflow. That is the oxygen flow. This is the minimal basics they start with as per if they want to start with an HFNC. And then ABG values are being checked periodically, and as per if they see that the PaO2 is improving, so they will try to decrease the FiO2 as well as the flow. So in case if there's no HFNC available, you can also use an NRBM. So NRBM is a non-rebreathing mask. So in this non-rebreathing mask, it is just a substitute of an HFNC. But the only thing, the disadvantage in an NRBM is that it doesn't, in that we cannot set up the PEEP. PEEP is positive end expiratory pressure. So in an NRBM, we cannot have a PEEP pressure set as what we can do in HFNC, which is an advantage in that. Otherwise, the functioning and the FiO2 delivery and the flow, that is 60%, 60 liters of minute, is done by your NRBMs. If the patient is still not maintaining SpO2 or your PaO2s on this HFNCs or NRBMs, then the patient is switched on to intubation. The patient is intubated and put on a mechanical ventilation. Mechanical ventilation should be the last option for any COVID-19 patient. So if a patient comes to you and his respiratory functioning is not so good, so do not jump into an intubation. First C is PaO2, so it goes as gradually. So if the patient is not maintaining on a face mask, he's put on an FHNC or a BiPAP or a NRBM. And if still not maintaining, then you intubate the patient. Now remember, intubation is a procedure where you do expect aerosols, and this will create a high risk for the doctor or the nurse to get infected during the procedure. So there are some, you must have seen in news that there are some cases, see-through cases, which the doctors can use while intubating, or such like those cases can be used, so that your spread of aerosols is not there, or you don't come in contact with the aerosols. Also, you have to use additional PP. Okay, so the PP what we want, so in addition to it, a face shield has to be used, an extra sterile gloves have to be used, and a disposable gown has to be used, that after procedure which can be discarded and throw, which can be discarded. So in this, during the intubation in our hospital, what we do is we sedate and paralyze the patients. So we sedate and paralyze the patient using medications such as Midas. We use fentanyl. We use rocuronium, that is atracurium. So all these medications are used where the patient is sedated and paralyzed. So once the patient is paralyzed, there is no question of production of aerosols. So this is how we do it for our COVID-19 patients. Then after that, once everything is done, also while the patient is intubated, bacterial filters are put. So 3 bacterial filters are put, that is one at the ET end, that is towards the patient end, and 2 at the ventilator end. Okay, so this is safeguarding the tubing and the ventilator machine to get infected with the virus. And these usually filters are not removed and discarded until it is really clogged or as per the manufacturer instructions. So it stays with the circuit, and thus it is used till the end, till the patient is extubated, or as I have mentioned, whether it is, if it gets clogged, or as per the manufacturing instructions, you will have to change it. Okay. Then also, as Miss Bincy has mentioned about closed suctioning. So closed suctioning is also very important. So closed suctioning also prevents the exposure of aerosols again. So all patients in the COVID unit should have closed system for suctioning. And this is also safer for the patient as well as the nurses. Also, in patients which require higher oxygen, who has higher requirements for oxygen and their PaO2 are really low, these patients are put onto prone position. So in our hospital, what we do is proning helps for getting your PaO2s really improved. So in proning, the patient is put on prone position for 16 to 24 hours. And after that, after 16 hours or 24 hours as prescribed by the doctor, the patient is again put into supine position to just deliver like your basic hygienic care and like your mouth care, your line care and all those things to complete with that. And once the patient is supine, a chest x-ray and an ABG analysis is done of this patient. So if this shows an improved PaO2, then there's no need of a proning session again. But depending on this, like if your PaO2s are really not improved, then another session of 16 to 24 hours of prone position is given to the patient. So the risk of patient injury, line delinement, falls, staff problems, manpower. So all these things are challenges in keeping in putting a patient into prone position. As Minimum has already said, proning, only just to prone a patient, you require around 6 to 7 nurses to prone to ensure that the patient is prone properly. So you have to take extreme care while proning the patients. Then we have so we've completed with the respiratory system. Next is a cardiovascular system. So for cardiovascular system, you have to assess your arterial pressures, so systolic and diastolic arterial pressures. So you need to have an arterial line monitoring. You need to monitor your MAPS, that is your mean arterial pressures. Also, some patients might require central venous pressure monitoring, that is your CVP monitoring. Based on this CVP monitoring, the CVP is going to give an idea how well is your cardiac functioning. And as per the CVPs, your fluid requirement or fluid management is being decided. So also these patients have a high large increased levels of D dimers. So for this, the doctors may start on low molecular weight heparins, and this is given just to bring your D dimers down. Also, the patient is at a risk of developing DVTs, that is deep vein thrombosis. So low molecular heparins will work for that. Then musculoskeletal system, patient will have easy fatigability, dyspnea, cardiac status is poor. So some of the patients are like sedated and paralyzed. So for this patient, you will have to really give a back care, too early position change. You have to take care of their hygienic needs. The physiotherapist might drop in to give them passive ROM exercises, chest PT and all those things. So all these things have to be taken care of also. In GI system, monitor the nutritional intake of the patient. For a COVID-19 patient, the nutritional intake consists of a high calorie diet and a high protein diet. The protein requirement for this patient is around 2 grams per kg per day. And the fluid intake can go up to like 2 to 3 liters per day, but again, depending on the cardiac status of the patient. So in addition to this diet, vitamin C supplementation, multivitamin supplementation is also started for the patients. Those patients who are on RT feeds, these patients are given additional nutritional supplements, protein powders, which will take care of the protein requirement of the patient. For medications, now these patients are are given a lot of medications. So there are some medications you have to watch for desirable and undesirable effects. So these are like, for example, patient is on methylprednisolone steroid. Okay, so it is going to suppress your immunity. Also, it is going to increase the blood sugar levels. So when a patient is on methylprednisolone, the sugar levels are obviously going to go high. So it is the nurse's responsibility to check the HGT periodically, frequently, and usually the patients are started on HI or short-acting insulins to take care of these increased glucose levels. Also, medicines like tocilizumab, itolizumab, and favipiravir, these are medicines which suppress your immunity. Okay, so these are given to the patients to treat COVID-19, and these are well in trial for the patients and shows efficiency in a good prognosis. So when the patient is on any of these medicines, so you do treat him as an immunosuppressive patient. So all the care what you do for a patient in isolation, contact isolation, or a protective isolation where your neutrophils are going down, the same care has to be provided for these patients, because the risk of getting an hospital acquired infection is much more higher in these patients. Now, what are the risks associated with nursing care? So nursing care associated risk, first one is HAPU. As we've said, patients in prone for 16 to 24 hours, bedridden patients who cannot turn by themselves. So these patients require back care, frequent positioning change. You have to use adequate gel pads when the patient is on prone position. You have to use semi-permeable foam dressings to cover all the pressure points to take care of them so that you don't have a HAPU there. And also we roll the pillows and we keep it ready so that if the patient is going to go on prone, sufficient padding is there with the patient. So you have to take care of the skin integrity. The second complication which can be expected is falls. So as we've said, while proning or while moving the patient can have fall and injury. So you have to be extremely careful while doing these any procedures, especially the proning one. You have to have adequate manpower. If you think that the manpower is less, you will have to call other departments to get an additional help. So it has to be an interdisciplinary teamwork during all these procedures. Next one, accidental delining of lines. So as Mini ma'am has already spoken about it, so you have to be more careful that the lines don't get pulled. It has to be taped securely and all those things. Also, patient is prone to have IV complication, infusion related complications. You have to have a thorough monitoring. You should have scales for peripheral lines. You have visual infusion phlebitis scales, that is VIP scales. So you should have a scale which will tell you to identify IV complication, infusion related complications at the earlier stages where it doesn't go bad. Also, hospital acquired infections is one of the major problems. So as Miss Bincy has spoken about it, so all the possible care you have to take care so that you do not have a cross contamination or infection between patients. You should not get infected or patient should not get infected. So all the things have to be done properly. Next, last complication is your medication errors. Okay, new drugs coming in the market, and most of them are under trials. Nurses don't know how to administer. They're hearing it for the first time. So our responsibility is that we have to be updated. What is the drug? How does it act? How is it to be administered? What are the probable side effects? So this is like you have to be really vigilant. The doctor's prescription order should be crisp and legible. It should be legible so enough that the nurse should understand what is prescribed. And the nurse, in case if it's an high alert medicine like your immunosuppressants or any like your potassium chlorides or any high alert medication, a witness should be there while preparing and administering. So it becomes a cross check during that you have administered the drug correctly. So for updating their knowledge also, we need to have training modules on the drugs, which is especially used in COVID-19, and we can circulate. So here in our hospital, we have created drug modules, training modules, which we can circulate. We have circulated through informal social platforms as well as mails, where the nurse can access it anytime. They can go through the drug and they get an idea, oh, this is what the drug is, and they know how to administer it. Last but not the least, the documentation is very very important. It is said that if not documented, not done. So don't assume that if it's in COVID-19 I'll just work, but the documentation is very important. Okay, because it helps us to see whether the patient is deteriorating or progressing. And also it will act as a good legal backup, or it will help you in legal suits. So that is why documentation has to be written then and there. And then as per Miss Bincy has said that these documents cannot be brought out of the ICU, so they can be scanned and stored in the PC. Also in our hospital, once the patient gets discharged, we have something called as a discharge kit. So this is something newly started by our hospital, where after discharge, if a person wants to avail this kit is available at nominal charges. So this is a comprehensive home package, home care package, which gives some of the items to the patients to take home, such as surgical mask, N95 mask. Then you have your medicines like Zinco-Vit, vitamin C, a Z tablet, so 1 strips of each of this. Then you have Bactorub, you have an SpO2 monitoring kit, a thermometer, and waste disposal bags. So all these items are given to the patient to take home. So this is at a nominal charge. Also, there's a package for where the patient at home can consult the infectious specialist, the doctor. The consultation is free. It's included in the by the dietitian, the psychologist. There's a 24/7 medical service available. So all these packages help the people to be more at ease when they go home. So they know that they can easily approach the hospital during any problems at home when they are discharged. Also, as I've said previously, education is very important for these nurses. So we as nurse educators or leaders, we have to ensure that they are trained on the job. So we just cannot say that we have stopped trainings or we cannot bring them together so we can stop trainings. We have to continue with the trainings. This is how we can build their skills and knowledges. And we have to create modules. Such more webinars will help to improve their knowledge levels. So you have to have periodic training, especially on COVID-19, because as Mini ma'am has already said, the nurses who work in the COVID-19 may not have an ICU experience. They might be from OT, ER. So you have to have a skill-based training. You have to have trainings on procedures and all those things for all the nurses across, and it has to be as per their feasibility, so that you can create the modules and they can see those modules whenever they are free. Now I'll be the last to summarize. There are some of the challenges in nursing care when you are taking care of the patients in the nursing in the isolation unit. So as Mini ma'am has already said about manpower, the competencies and skill of nurses who are from other departments. So that is a major challenge which we have. So trainings and counseling can help in those things. Also, like for example, there might be a pregnant lady coming into an isolation COVID-19 isolation unit. So again, the specialization care is going to go different. The nurse should know that she has to see the fetal heart rate, she has to monitor her fetal kicks and all those things. So she has to, the staff who's taking care of the patient should be competent enough to take care of such specialized patients also. Also, nurses must do only the nursing job, because what happens is if like somebody like charging of items or indenting medications, if there are a lot of functions given to a nurse, the nurse is obviously going to be overburdened and stressed. So an interdepartmental help from other departments is going to help in this. So for example, in our hospital we have ward clerks who do the all the charging part, keeping the PPs ready for them and keeping all the items and equipments and articles ready in the stores available to them so that they don't fall short of equipments. We have pharmacists who indent medicines for them in the COVID units. So these are some responsibilities which is taken away from the nurses, and nurses are like uh, a little stress free so that they can focus mostly on their nursing care rather than all these extra functions. Also, for example, like ABGs. So as Mini ma'am have already said, skills required in an ABG in wards. My ward nurses won't be so much skilled to take an ABG collection. So for those in our hospital, we have an anesthetist who help us to take the ABGs in the wards. So even that helps us to remove the stress from them. Also, you have like step down unit. So even that Mini ma'am has spoke about it. So you should have a step down unit where patients on O2 are separately managed, so the overburdening of the nurses are being reduced. Now if you see, researchers show that when a patient, when a nurse or a doctor is working in a PP, the output reduces to 10 to 20%. And then plus it's stressful for the nurse to wear the BP and work because it's so hot inside and they're not so comfortable. So obviously they are going to go under stress and they will have compassion fatigue occurring. So there should be some measures in the organization to curb onto this compassion fatigue, the stress levels. So one might be the counseling of nurses. You should have psychologists who can come into picture for counseling these nurses. Then should have stress management. You should provide their their stay area or accommodation area, you can give them some games to play, or you can have some music therapy where they can listen to music, or you can provide some rehab techniques or some things to get distracted from the stress what they work for the entire day. Also, you should have adequate off periods, so ensure that you have adequate offs given to the patient. So when you put a duty for a nurse, you should ensure that she gets at least 5 offs. So in our hospital, they do a 6 hours duty for 7 days, and 5 days offs are given for them. So you have to see, when you put the duty rota, you have to see their preferences also. So you have to be flexible in it. So it is like, if they say, today I cannot do this shift, can I do that shift? So you can accommodate their preferences also, so that even they are comfortable in working with us. Also, a good nutritional diet is should be given to these nurses when they are staying here. So protein diet, high protein diet. In case if they want to order something also, we allow them, so that they are like, okay, we can order something on our own. So they do that also. Also, some nurses who's been working since the start, that is from 23rd March, they come and approach us saying that we need a break. So you consider these breaks. So it is a break from working in the COVID-19 isolation units. So they might like say that now I want to work in non-COVID areas. So consider them. So they can work, you can give them a break by telling them to work in non-COVID areas for some days, and then they can come join back into the isolation unit. So this is how you keep their stress levels less, and also they have that self confidence uh, that they will be able to continue in the COVID units. So to conclude, the nurses are the real frontline warriors amidst COVID-19 pandemic, and they are responsible for the major part of the management of these patients. So I would like to congratulate and heartfelt thanks to the nurses who are working in these isolation units across India and across the world, to give their entire heart and strength to take care of these patients during the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Sneha. That was excellent. I think all the speakers have actually covered the topic in such a comprehensive way that there's very little room to ask you questions. But then still, we'll keep the drill. So we have had a few questions. Some questions I have actually written down while I was listening to all of you. So maybe my first question would be to Minimal Ma'am. Uh, that is there any guideline in terms of, okay, so let me ask you this one. Uh, so for how long would be the N95 masks be worn? Is there any standard practice, any best practice that you are advising, advocating? You'll have to unmute yourself.
So if they are working in a COVID positive unit, if nurses and doctors, they should change the mask once they are coming out. Like once in a day, they can't reuse the mask. So we in our hospital, of course, those who are in the non-COVID area or low risk area, they reuse the mask, because that WHO, we give them 5 masks, and end of day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, and then on day 5 you wear the other thing. That is only for low risk areas. But if the nurses and doctors and housekeeping, whoever is going inside a COVID unit, they need to change the mask. There is no reuse of the mask in the COVID unit.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Next question to Sister Bincy is how would you preserve documents inside when you are, recording, patient updates into, the patient file? How do you preserve those documents? I think your voice is muted. I think may have to put on the headphone.
So I'll answer for Bincy.
Put on the.
I'll answer for Bincy. I'll
Okay.
answer for this. So in the COVID ICU and wards, we have given scanners. So of course, we don't shift. If a positive patient going from ICU to ward, we shift the document. Positive ICU to positive ward, we shift the document. But end of discharge, this document has to go to MRD. So what we do is, if for PPA purpose, we require some documents, we scan. So all the COVID positive areas are being given scanner, tabs, mobile phones, and we scan and send the document. And every week, end of the week, we pack the MRD document and we send it to an area in MRD, a separate room. We keep it there for 10 to 15 days, or we can keep it there for a month, and then whatever that person we are given, in case if it has to be handled immediately for something, they wear a PPE. Otherwise, after 10 to 15 days, they can take that document and keep separate. So every week, MRD is send it to a separate room outside the unit. We pack in a carton and send it. And whoever is taking the MRD, all are in wearing PPE, and they take it and keep it in a separate room. And immediately required items are scanned and sent. Especially death patient and all, if they want immediately, we scan the document. So scanner is very, very important. There are no item which can go out and no paper can come in. If any paper comes in for something, it cannot go out. Like example, if I require a narcotic, this we missed to say. So narcotic has to be written a prescription, because in Maharashtra, in Mumbai, we don't store any narcotic in the ICUs or in the ward, but fentanyl is required. The prescription is written outside. Okay, and then the prescription is sent. So nothing, any paper which is written inside doesn't go out immediately. Even nurses doesn't even carry pens. The pen, pencil, whatever required is provided inside. They don't carry any mobile phone, nothing. They just wear PP and they end up. No pens, nothing they carry. It's everything is provided inside.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. The next question is, in fact, we know there are more questions coming, but in the interest of time, we'll keep it short. Is that in the terminal cleaning, when a patient is transferred to a CT department, is it recommended to just spray the hypochlorite spray and then do the terminal cleaning once the patient goes back to the COVID ward? I mean, Sister Bincy, you may want to take it up.
Yeah, a hypochlorite spray can be used. As I said, it depends on hospital to hospital what infection control measures they have planned for their departments. Like for terminal cleaning, if a hospital chooses to use hypochlorite sprays, that can be used. So just it should be ensured that the terminal cleaning is done appropriately, either using a 1% sodium hypochlorite solution or a quaternary ammonium compound, and it has to be completely cleaned. That's it. So spray or Tuffy wipes or whatever modality, it can be used for terminal cleaning.
Thank you so much. To Sister Sneha, any specific care that you consider for pediatric patients who are unfortunately found to be COVID positive?
Actually, pediatric, we have not been received any patient till now. So it is said that the pediatric group of people are not so affected with the virus till yet now.
Correct.
So it is like until the adults or the parents who have symptoms, then only there's a suspect or there's a chance that the pediatric might get affected. Otherwise, up to now, there have not been any case till now who's been affected with pediatric in our hospital.
So we don't cater to pediatric population. We are at present focusing only on adult.
Only on adults. All right, ma'am. Thank you. Ma'am, would you like to, minimum ma'am, would you like to take this question? One is that, do you still hear about the social stigma which is associated with healthcare workers? I mean, say once you go back to your apartments and all, is the reception like a hero? Like all we say in these forums, we say that the nurse is today a hero. But once you go back to your own homes, is the society still, understanding the contribution that you're making?
So I'll tell you, in Maharashtra, now we are treating patients since March 23rd. It was very crucial in the beginning months, in the month of March and April. Our employees have faced issues when they went back, but now it is subsided because now every society has a positive patient. So earlier it was they used to get scared if there is a healthcare worker so stays in a society, that person is going to spread infection. So I'm very happy. So I live in a society. So I did not have any social stigma, but there are non-healthcare people got affected in my society. So I was very happy. So it is not me, the first one to get affected. So it was people who are, because it is community spread, people who are going out to get some groceries, to buy vegetables, they get infected. So in Maharashtra, that has now come down. But in the earlier days, it was really, there was social stigma. But still, if I want, we have hostel. So if there are people, so our hostel is situated in societies. So any new joinee comes, there are situations we have to inform the society that a new person is going to come join and all. But in Maharashtra, now that has come down. Maybe the new state which is coming up with a lot of COVID, they may be facing that. So now we are out of all those stigma and everything.
Good to hear that. Back to heroes. The question again, one that I have is to Sister Sneha, is that is CBP monitoring possible for prone patients? So you talk about, and there are so many challenges with prone patients, and you talk about underskilled staff that you're trying to manage from other units. So how difficult and how do you encounter those things? Take care of those things?
Okay, so the first part of the question for the CVP monitoring in prone position. See, if a patient is inserted with a CVP central line and for a CVP monitoring, and the prone position is decided after that. So you're not just going to remove the line and stop the CVP monitoring. So you just have to prone him, just ensure that the transducer is at the chest level and see that the monitoring is there. So it is going, the values are going to get affected a little, like 1 or 2 mm per Hg up or down, but then still it gives me an estimate showing that, okay, what is my cardiac functioning. So CVP monitoring can be done in prone positions also. And for the second one, as you say, you asked for the skilled, the skill problems. So yes, we do have this challenge with us because we have OT nurses, we are ER nurses. But then the best thing what we have is our ICU team is a very approachable team, and they do work as a teamwork. So when it comes to teamwork, these ICU nurses handhold these new nurses. They take them during procedures. They tell them, see, this is to be done like that. So handholding and mentoring becomes very important in such situations where, as for example, if I want to upgrade them on knowledge, I can send them training modules. But during procedures, it has to be actual hands-on, and they have to see the procedure and do it themselves, and that is how they're going to learn. So for that, the ICU team, the nurses who worked in the ICUs can become a mentor for these nurses who can tell them how the procedures is done, and then over a period of time, like in a period of 1 week or 2 weeks, they do come over this fear or skill problems.
Sure. Thank you. Sister Vincy, one question for you. We heard about NRBMs and we heard about HFNCs. Do you still consider that because you're transferring high flow rates at 60 liters per minute, or maybe very high flow rates, are these also considered to be aerosol generating? Because you spoke about closed suctions. Would this also generate some amount of aerosols?
Yeah, Sneha will chip in.
Sure.
Yeah. So for the HFNCs is not an aerosol producing machine or this thing. So it is as safe as a BiPAP, but even the BiPAP has, like, if you try to disconnect when the BiPAP is on, it is going to give you flow. So in an HFNC, that is the plus point. You don't have to disconnect it at any time because the patient is always on a nasal, it's like a nasal prong. So see, when does a BiPAP get disconnected? When a patient wants to eat or when he wants to talk. That's the only time when a BiPAP gets disconnected. So in an HFNC, these are not the problem because it is only as a nasal prong which enters the nasal nasal cavity. So your mouth is open, so you don't have to disconnect it. So yes, obviously HFNCs do not become an aerosol producing procedure.
Thank you so much. A last question, the very last question to Minimal Ma'am is if a nurse wants to take a break from the COVID unit, do they need to undergo a COVID test or be quarantined straightforward? What's the schedule?
As I said, we are one of the hospital. We started with in March 23rd. We started our first patient, and we were the first one to give 7 days duty, 7 days off, and if we had to come out 14 days off, that is not at all possible. So now what we practice is we are not giving them 7 days off and all. So mostly who are working in the COVID, the nurses willingly said they want to work, and very few have discontinued from COVID. Okay, other all are continuing in the COVID. What I'm doing is I'm giving them 5 days off. So that is a period in case that nurse has to come out and work in non-COVID areas. Earlier we were giving them 14 days of, off, 7 and 7. Now we are giving them around 7 to 10 days off, and they are into non-COVID areas. But we tell them to watch for any symptoms, like if they have headache or loss of smell or taste, or immediately we do their test. Otherwise, test is, you don't require to do any test unless you are. So Maharashtra we do this. I don't know about other state, but actually it is not required. Only thing, that person has to be very vigilant about any signs and symptoms, immediately report and do the test.
Thank you. Thank you to each one
I
of
just want to wind up saying that, see, everything is possible. You have to keep your nurses happy, and it is very difficult to give that much manpower in a ICU or ward. Maybe a 5 nurse may be managing around 30 patient or 40 patients. What we can do as leaders, we need to remember, take away non-nursing work from them. Because it is very difficult for others to pitch in the COVID area, because you have to think about infection, waste of PP, everyone cannot enter. So what you do is take away non-nursing sitting from out. So which we can do, see, it is not in government hospital, but private hospital, we have to do all charging of consumables, procedures, or, indenting items for inside, indenting medication for my pharmacy. So in our hospital, everything is done from outside. Nurses doesn't have to do any charging. Nurses doesn't have to do any indenting. Even medication indent is done from outside with the pharmacist. So the nurses click the medicine or put it in the tab. This is what require, or the treatment sheet is seen in the pharmacy, and according to what is required, the pharmacist indents and the medicine reaches the patient. So nurse doesn't have to keep on follow up, a medicine maine dala kya, and all those things. Even to blood collection. So a 40 bedded ward has all 40 patient requirement of blood collection every day early morning. So it takes away 2 hours of the precious time early morning for the nurse to do the phlebotomy. So you take help from others like a lab person or someone else going inside and doing blood collection, which will remove the burden from the nurses. So make life easy for the nurses to perform in the COVID area. So they will be happy to work in the area, because it is very, very difficult to work within the PP. You have goggles, and first of all, you won't be able to hear, vision, all this is a problem, and you are double gloved. So as Sneha said, the output of the nurse reduces 10 to 20% in the COVID area. So help them out to perform better. So this is what I take away non-nursing work, make the nurses happy. because we don't know when we are going to come out from COVID. So balance it.
Very well said, ma'am. Very well said. I think it's a very strong message to everyone. It's not, walk the talk to everyone. Just walk the talk. Not only celebrate nurses as heroes, but also show your contribution in their work. I mean, so if you can take up part of the responsibility, then they can dedicate more towards patient care. I think it's a very strong message. I think I'm sure that everyone would have enjoyed every bit of today's discussion. I have learned myself a lot. I've been scribbling a lot of notes, um, and I can't thank enough to all of you. I think it has been a very comprehensive, very informative session for all of us, and I'm sure that maybe on a very important topic towards improving patient care outcomes, etc. We'll touch base with all of you once again, and to create a forum once more like this. So on behalf of Polymed, from all of us, we thank all of you, Minimo ma'am, Sister Sneha, Sister Vinci, for sharing your perspectives on COVID-19 patients from a nursing point of view. Thank you very much.